this is how our plan, the insurance plan, will require them to step forward to put premiums up so that the taxpayers are paid for giving the benefit of a government guarantee.
Nothing in that plan deals with the part of it that Mr. Cantor agrees where you have to buy up the bad stuff. That plan does not help pay for the past mistakes. It is something that is future-oriented, and if it works, that'll be very encouraging. But it doesn't. It does not clean up. No, Eric, it doesn't clean up the current problem. It is still going to be hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers in that bill. Money
there's no question, but we don't have to go in and purchase $700 billion worth of securities when we know good and well at least $2 trillion worth of that paper is performing.
I agree.
And has been tainted and a victim of the bad stuff.
But you got to buy some of the bad stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's taxpayer money. And Wall Street's not going to be paid for that unless you would. Well, here's what we did get agreed to. At the end of the 5 years, the president will have to see how much it costs, and we will ask him to submit under this bill. We tell him to submit to Congress a proposal to have Wall Street pay for it. And then 5 years from now, that'll be the reckoning day.
And going forward, Wolf, what we hope is that we have set up a mechanism in this mandatory insurance program that will allow Congress to review how successful we've been in terms of intervening, and so that the private sector will respond to the benchmark set by government purchases so that the private capital will come back in and will purchase the assets and will insure the assets that they would like to hold on to and frankly are performing. At the end of the day, again, the House Republican plan makes sure that we bring private capital back into this equation, which is the most important thing we can do going forward, and to hold the people accountable and let Wall Street pay.
No, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to put reasonable regulations in place. Eric gave this great talk about the free market, and they have done a lot of good, but it is the free market on its own, by over-leveraging, by sophisticated...
This started with
excuse me, Eric, please don't interrupt me. Eric, I'm sorry. Eric, don't interrupt me. The financial deregulation didn't start with them. Let me give you one last fact to go with then. 1994, the Democratic Congress, the last one before now, passed a bill that told the Federal Reserve, restrict subprime mortgages that are being done outside of banks, which are regulated. Restrict the unregulated subprime mortgages. Alan Greenspan, a strong conservative, said no, the market knows better than I, and refused to do it. It wasn't until 2007 when we came back that we were able to put some pressure on, and Ben Bernanke, to his credit, promulgated the rules that Greenspan wouldn't do it, and there'll be no more subprime mortgages.
Congressman Cantor, go ahead and respond.
Wolf, at the end of the day, the Carter administration, we saw Congress put into law regulations requiring banks to extend credit to non-credit-worthy borrowers. In fact, the banks would be punished under
you're talking about the Jimmy Carter. Hold on a second, Congressman Cantor. You're talking about the Jimmy Carter administration.
We're talking about Congress during the 70s put into place some regulation that would punish banks if they did not extend credit to some uncredit-worthy borrowers. And what we had then is we had the government leading in terms of trying to push the lending to folks so they could buy housing when the creditworthiness was not there. And obviously, Barney, I'd agree that the private sector followed suit. But it all started with the fact that we had these government-sponsored entities there beginning to loosen underwriting guidelines that got us to where we are. So we do need some re-regulation.
Let me respond here, because I'm very disappointed that Eric would characterize efforts to prevent racial discrimination. Eric, let me finish. You made your accusation, and it's wrong. The Community Reinvestment Act never said you had to lend to unworthy borrowers. The anti-discrimination things never said that. They said you can't discriminate. You can't walk away from whole neighborhoods. But even with that, again, you're ignoring the point. 1994, Congress did pass a law saying, wait a minute, we're afraid that the wrong kind of mortgages are being issued. Alan Greenspan refused to use the authority. If he'd used the authority as Ben Bernanke did, Greenspan being a great deregulator, we would have shut this off way before the problem got to the dimensions it did.
Wolf, at the end of the day, it was Congress 20-some years ago that set the bar here and said, you know what, we're going to loosen underwriting guidelines for good intentions to let people aspire to the American dream of home ownership. And at the end of the day, what happened is the regulations went wild and really began to punish institutions if they weren't able to demonstrate that they had these bad loans out their issues.
There's terrible history here. Yeah, the bill passed in '77. The regulations were mostly promulgated after that by the Reagan administration. But again, it is true people were worried about that. In 1994, you keep ignoring this, Eric. Congress told Alan Greenspan to try and have it so that creditworthy African Americans and Hispanics and people in poor neighborhoods got it, and not others. And Greenspan, as a true conservative, said, the market knows better and I won't do it.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but a good, serious discussion, and it raises a lot of questions for down the road. But right now, the immediate issue is this $700 billion legislation. Will it pass tomorrow? Won't it pass? And we'll watch together with both of you. Congressman Frank, Congressman Cantor, thanks to both of you for coming in. The U.S. energy crisis certainly has become a key issue in the presidential campaign, but are Barack Obama and John McCain adequately addressing this issue? Just a short while ago, I spoke about that and a lot more with the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman. He's the author of a brand new book entitled Hot, Flat, and Crowded: Why We Need a Green Revolution and How It Can Renew America. The new book today emerged as the New York Times #1 bestseller. Tom Friedman, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome back to Late Edition.
Great to be with you, Wolf. Thank you.
What do you think about this bailout announcement, this breakthrough that came through overnight?
I feel good about it. I wish we didn't have to go into debt, to bail out our financial system, of course. But we faced a credit crisis, Wolf. And credit crisis is hard to see. But when you face a credit crisis, what it means is no one's lending to anybody else. And a credit crisis, I think, can only be dealt with what I would call the financial equivalent of the Powell Doctrine: overwhelming force. In this case, overwhelming capital. You have to smother it. Unfortunately, some people are going to be bailed out who don't at all deserve to be bailed out. But the most important thing is that people who don't deserve at all to be punished, basically, are not going to suffer from a real meltdown of the economy. Let's hope.
Who are those who are going to be bailed out who shouldn't necessarily be bailed out? Who are you referring to?
Well, I mean people obviously in the financial market who ran up a lot of these risks for banks and investment banks, and now their banks aren't going to collapse. Obviously, they're not going to be punished, but most importantly, all their depositors are not going to be punished, and I think that's what we have to keep our eye on. So,
bottom line is, you see this potentially as good for Main Street, not just for Wall Street.
Absolutely. I mean, basically, had this not gone through, Wolf, I mean, a lot of small businesses would not have gotten loans. There are people who would have gone to the ATM machine and not gotten money out, and they would have lost their jobs. Unfortunately, this is a necessary evil. But what I think we need to focus on, Wolf, is how do we get beyond this? Because this is just that. It's a bailout. We need a build-up. We need to get back to making things, Wolf, and not just financial engineering, but real engineering. I think that's what we need to be focusing on.
Now, what do you want to see built up? I know that the book, your new book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, has a lot of recommendations, a lot of proposals to take advantage of this crisis right now and build up, as you say, rather than just bail out. Explain what you have in mind.
Well, what I mean is that, in the 19th century, Wolf, we had a boom and a bubble and a bust around railroads, but that bubble left us with a national railroad system. In the 20th century, we had a big dot-com boom, bubble, and bust, but that left us with an internet highway. Unfortunately, this financial boom, bubble, and bust has left us with basically a lot of Florida condos and dead derivatives, and we need to the extent that the government can profit from this, and some people think it will ultimately be able to make money on the bailout, we need to make sure those funds are directed to laying the foundation of a new industry, an industry I call in the book ET, energy technology, which I think is going to be the biggest industry in the 21st century, and the country that dominates ET, it will be even more important than IT, the information technology.
And I want to discuss the two presidential candidates and your vision of what needs to be done. But I want to play this clip first of what Senator McCain said Friday night in the first presidential debate. Listen to this.
Let me point out, I also warned about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and warned about corporate greed and excess and CEO pay and all that. A lot of us saw this train wreck coming.
Based on everything you know, was McCain on top of all of this over these past several years?
If he was, I missed it. I can't say I've parsed all his comments these past few years. To me, the whole regulatory structure in Washington and everyone who was a part of it and everyone who enabled it was basically asleep at the switch. We went into the business as a country of letting Wall Street self-regulate. Well, when you let people self-regulate, you get these kinds of extremes.
Who is to blame, first and foremost, in your mind, for this the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression?
Well, obviously there's no, single party to blame. On the one hand, we, as a government, as I say, lapsed into a mode of basically taking all regulation off. And as a result, Wall Street did what Wall Street did. It went for greed. At the same time, there's a lot of people who enjoyed going in and getting a subprime mortgage that allowed them to get the American dream, even though they didn't they knew they really didn't qualify for that mortgage. So, you know, obviously I put the blame